The rain in Portland didn't fall so much as it attacked. November brought sheets of gray that turned the world into watercolor bleeding colors until everything looked the same shade of despair. Vivian Thornton stood at the base of the slate walkway leading to the Ashford estate, her fingers wrapped around the small hands of her twins. Iris and Jasper pressed against her legs, their 6-year-old bodies shivering beneath jackets 2 sizes too large, hand-me-downs from a church donation bin she'd visited 3 days prior. The mansion rose before them like a monument to exclusion, glass and steel all sharp angles and cold reflections perched on a hill in Willamette Heights where the wealthy looked down on everyone else in the literal sense. Vivian had been here only twice before, once for a Christmas dinner where Cordelia served prime rib and passive-aggressive comments in equal measure. Once for Callum's memorial service where his mother had insisted on closed casket despite Vivian's protests, as if even in death her son needed to be presented according to specifications. 4 months. It had been 4 months since the police knocked on the door of their small apartment in Tacoma with news that turned the world sideways. Hit and run on I-84. Drunk driver crossed the median. Callum died on impact. The Navy sent representatives. The funeral home sent bills. The Ashfords sent nothing. Vivian pressed the doorbell, the chime echoing with a resonance that spoke of money and distance. The door opened not to reveal a housekeeper, but Cordelia herself. 62 years old and dressed in cashmere, the color of old money pearl earrings that probably cost more than Vivian's last 6 months of rent. Her silver hair swept back in a style that required professional maintenance. Her makeup applied with the precision of someone who treated their face like a corporate asset. The older woman's eyes moved over Vivian with the clinical assessment of an appraiser rejecting damaged goods. Then down to the children lingering on their thrift store jackets, their muddy sneakers, the way Jasper's hair stuck up in the back because Vivian had run out of the gel Callum used to tame his cowlicks. Vivian! The name emerged like an accusation. I thought we were clear at the service. The warmth from inside the house spilled out into the cold, carrying the scent of something expensive, cooking something that required herbs Vivian couldn't afford, and techniques she'd never learned. Her stomach tightened not from hunger, but from the memory of hunger from knowing that in 3 days the motel room came due and she had $67 in her checking account. Cordelia, I need to talk to you. The words came out steadier than Vivian expected, muscle memory from the years she'd spent as an ER nurse before budget cuts eliminated her position. Stay calm in emergencies. Project confidence even when the patient is coding. It's about the children. They are your children, dear. Cordelia's smile held all the warmth of a contract termination. You made that choice when you trapped my son with a pregnancy. The accusation hung in the air between them like smoke. Vivian felt Iris's hand tighten in hers, felt the way Jasper moved behind her leg, making himself smaller. They understood tone even when they didn't grasp meaning. Children always did. We loved each other. We chose to start a family. Each word required effort like pushing stones uphill. But right now I need help. Just temporary. Just until I can get back on my feet. Movement behind Cordelia. Behind. Genevieve appeared at her mother's shoulder, 36 years old, and dressed like she was attending a board meeting in her own home. Vivian had met her sister-in-law perhaps 5 times total. Each encounter left the impression of a woman who treated kindness like a limited resource, something to be rationed and never wasted on people who couldn't increase her social standing. Genevieve's eyes swept over the scene with the detached interest of someone watching a documentary about poverty. Something distant, something that happened to other people. Good heavens, Mother, did you order something from a charity catalog? And it arrived on the doorstep. The laugh that followed carried the practiced cruelty of someone who'd spent years in private schools learning how to wound with wit. Shall I call security or the Goodwill pickup service? Jasper made a small sound, not quite a whimper but close. Vivian pulled him closer, her free hand moving to his shoulder, protective and probably futile. The rain intensified, drumming harder against the slate, against her cheap jacket, against the careful composure she'd built like armor around her desperation. Please. The word tasted like failure. I'm not asking for money, just a place for them to stay. A warm bed, regular meals. I'll sleep in my truck if I have to, but they shouldn't be. They are your burden. Vivian. Cordelia's voice dropped to something colder than the November rain, harder than the marble foyer visible behind her. You wanted my son to live that dreadful little life with you in that apartment that smelled of other people's cooking. You insisted he could be happy driving a decade-old car and working private security contracts between deployments. These are the consequences of your choices. The truth of it cut deeper than the insult. Callum had been happy. He'd laughed in that apartment, had taught Iris to read on their second-hand sofa, had given Jasper horsey rides on the worn carpet until both of them collapsed in giggles. He'd loved their small life with an intensity that had made the smallness irrelevant. But Callum was gone, and love didn't pay for motel rooms or groceries or the medical bills that kept arriving, even though the patient would never need treatment again. "They're your grandchildren." Vivian heard the crack in her own voice, hated herself for it. "Callum is gone. They're all you have left of him." Genevieve leaned forward, examining the twins with the interest one might show examining an insurance claim. Her gaze lingered on their clothes, their posture, the way they huddled together for warmth and comfort. Then she straightened, brushing an invisible speck from her silk blouse. "Welfare office opens at 9 a.m. Vivian. I'm sure they have programs for people in your situation." The smile that accompanied this suggestion held no humor, only the satisfaction of someone who'd found the perfect cutting remark. "Though you might want to arrive early, I understand the lines are quite long." Behind them a black sedan pulled through the gates, pausing as it passed. The window rolled down halfway, revealing a distinguished-looking woman with silver hair cut in a sharp bob, wire-rimmed glasses that caught the dim light. She looked at Vivian, then at the house, her expression unreadable. Then the window rolled up, and the car continued down the hill, disappearing into the rain-soaked streets below. Cordelia stepped back, her hand moving to the heavy oak door. The gesture carried the finality of a judge's gavel, a decision rendered and not subject to appeal. "My son died because he chose you over his family, over his future, over everything we'd built for him." Each word landed like a stone thrown with precision. "If you cannot provide for those children, surrender them to the state. Find people who can give them what you clearly cannot, but do not darken my doorstep again with your failures." The door closed with a sound that echoed through the evening, through the rain, through the hollow space in Vivian's chest where hope had briefly flickered. She stood there for a long moment, water streaming down her face, mixing with something warmer that she refused to acknowledge as tears. Iris tugged at her hand. "Mama." The voice came small and confused. "Don't they like us?" Vivian crouched down, pulling both children close, shielding them from the wind that had started to howl across the exposed hilltop. Jasper's face pressed into her shoulder. Iris's curls, so like Callum's, the same chaotic brown spirals that never quite obeyed, were plastered to her forehead. "They're just scared, baby." The lie came easily, a mother's protective instinct overriding honesty. When people are scared, sometimes they forget how to be kind. "What are they scared of?" Jasper's question muffled against her jacket, his breath warm on her collarbone. That the twins existed, that they carried Callum's eyes, his smile, his ability to find joy in simple things. That their existence proved their son had chosen love over legacy, meaning over money. That they represented everything Cordelia had tried to breed out of the Ashford line. "It doesn't matter." Vivian stood, each child's hand reclaimed. "We're going on an adventure, just the three of us." She led them back to the truck, a 2008 Ford Ranger that Callum had bought used and maintained with the methodical care he'd applied to his weapons during deployment. It started on the third try, the heater coughing out air that was marginally warmer than the rain outside. Vivian pulled onto the street, leaving the Ashford estate behind, watching it shrink in the rearview mirror until it disappeared entirely. The Sunset Motel occupied a stretch of 82nd Avenue where the American dream came to die quietly. Neon flickered vacancy in pink letters that had been buzzing since the Reagan administration. $28 a night, paid in cash, no questions asked, as long as you kept the noise down and didn't damage anything the owner couldn't fix with duct tape and optimism. Room 114 smelled of cigarette smoke buried under industrial cleaner, of mildew growing in corners the cleaning staff had given up on, of other people's desperation, soaked into carpet that had never been replaced, only shampooed into temporary submission. But it had a door that locked, and a bed the three of them could share, and a bathroom where the water ran hot if you waited long enough. Vivian cooked SpaghettiOs on the hot plate she'd bought at Goodwill, serving them in disposable bowls because the motel didn't provide dishes and she couldn't afford real ones. The twins ate without complaint, their resilience both heartbreaking and necessary. Afterward, she read to them from a library copy of Charlotte's Web, doing the voices the way Callum used to. Templeton's greed and Charlotte's wisdom and Wilbur's innocent confusion, all filtering through her exhaustion into something that almost resembled normalcy. When they finally slept curled together under a blanket that carried the permanent chemical smell of industrial washing, Vivian sat by the window. The neon vacancy sign cast pink shadows across the parking lot, illuminating cars in various states of decay, lives in various states of postponement. She opened her laptop, a 6-year-old machine that took 3 minutes to boot up, and checked her email. Rejection. Another private security firm had reviewed her application for administrative work and determined she was overqualified, which was code for too expensive, which was code for, we found someone younger who'll work for less. Her nursing license had lapsed during the years she'd stayed home with the twins, and renewal required courses she couldn't afford and clinical hours she couldn't complete while working 2 jobs to survive. The checking account showed $67.43. The motel required payment in 3 days. She had applications pending at a call center, a dental office that needed a receptionist, and a warehouse looking for night shift workers. None had responded. All required reliable transportation, which meant keeping the truck running, which meant oil changes and insurance payments, and a registration renewal coming due next month. Vivian closed the laptop and moved to the small table where she'd unpacked the box of Callum's belongings. The Navy had returned his personal effects in a standard-issue container, everything carefully inventoried and signed for. Dress uniforms she'd never be able to look at without grief crushing her lungs. His wedding ring bent slightly from years of wear during training exercises. Photographs from deployments, Callum with his team, faces she'd met at the funeral, men who'd promised to stay in touch and then disappeared back into their own lives. At the bottom, wedged between folded T-shirts that still carried the ghost of his cologne, she found an envelope. The paper had yellowed with age, the handwriting slanted and difficult to decipher, ink faded to brown in places. The envelope itself bore no address, just 2 words written across the front: for Callum. Inside, a single sheet of notepaper torn at the bottom as if someone had ripped away the signature in haste or anger. The visible text read, "Callum, your grandfather Alistair wanted to meet Vivian before he passed last spring. He said she reminds him of your grandmother Elizabeth. He spoke of her with such hope, said she has the spine the family needs. Don't let your mother stop you from the rest." Gone. No signature, no date, no context beyond the fragmented message and its implications. Vivian read it 3 times, searching for meaning in the gaps. Callum had never mentioned a grandfather. In 8 years of marriage, through deployments and homecomings, through the births of their children and the mundane machinery of building a life together, he'd never once spoken of Alistair Thornton. She pulled out her phone, typed the name into Google. The results came slowly over the motel's spotty Wi-Fi, but they came. Alistair Thornton, founder of Thornton Defense Solutions, aerospace contracts, logistics networks, quiet philanthropic efforts that never sought publicity. Net worth estimated between 200 and 300 million, though the articles noted he'd always refused to appear on Forbes lists or grant interviews. Died 5 months ago at his estate outside Portland. Survived by no immediate family, his wealth distributed according to a private trust. 5 months. Callum died 4 months ago. Whatever Alistair had wanted, whatever meeting he'd hoped to arrange, the window had closed before either man could reach through it. Vivian stared at the partial letter, at the careful handwriting of someone who'd taken time to compose their thoughts, and felt the absence of answers like a physical ache. The knock came at 7:43 the next morning. 3 sharp raps that pulled Vivian from the shallow sleep she'd managed, curled in the chair by the window. She'd learned to wake instantly during Callum's deployments, trained herself to hear threats before they materialized, a skill that had never left even after the deployments ended. Through the peephole she saw a woman, 68 or 70, silver haircut in a precise bob, wire-rimmed glasses, a charcoal suit that spoke of professional competence and personal discipline. Vivian opened the door to the length the chain allowed her body, blocking any view of the sleeping children. "Mrs. Thornton." The woman's voice carried the measured neutrality of someone trained in law or medicine, someone who delivered difficult news as part of their profession. "My name is Millicent Cross. I'm an attorney with Cross & Associates. I apologize for the early hour, but I've been trying to locate you for several weeks." The name registered from somewhere, a fragment of memory Vivian couldn't quite place. The black sedan from yesterday. The woman who'd slowed outside the Ashford estate, who'd looked at her with that unreadable expression before driving away. "I don't have money for a lawyer." The automatic response, the shield she'd learned to raise against anyone who might be bringing more bills, more problems, more weight to add to the crushing load she already carried. "Whatever this is about, I can't. I'm not here to take your money, Vivian." Millicent's use of her first name felt both presumptuous and oddly familiar. "I'm here to give you yours." The words made no sense, syntax without meaning, sounds arranged in an order that defied interpretation. Vivian stared through the gap in the door, trying to reconcile the statement with any version of reality she understood. "I represent the estate of Alistair Thornton." Millicent shifted her briefcase from one hand to the other, a gesture that seemed designed to demonstrate she held no weapons, posed no threat. "Your husband's grandfather, and I have information that requires immediate discussion. May I come in?" The motel room looked even worse with a witness. Vivian saw it through Millicent's eyes as she unchained the door and stepped aside. The stained carpet, the hot plate on the dresser, the twins still sleeping in their clothes because she hadn't been able to afford laundromat quarters yesterday. The poverty of it all laid bare for assessment and judgment. But Millicent's expression remained neutral, as she entered, setting her briefcase on the small table with the care of someone placing something valuable on an altar. She waited until Vivian closed the door until they stood in the cramped space with its smell of other people's cigarettes and its permanently flickering fluorescent light over the bathroom sink. Alistair Thornton died 5 months ago. Millicent spoke quietly, mindful of the sleeping children. He had been estranged from your husband's family for many years, a rift that began when Callum's father died and widened when Cordelia assumed control of the family assets. Alistair built his fortune independently, kept it separate, and distributed it according to his own wishes. Vivian's mind struggled to process the information, to find the connection between a grandfather Callum never mentioned and this attorney appearing at a motel room at dawn with news that required briefcases and appointments. I don't understand what this has to do with me. Millicent opened the briefcase, removing a blue velvet folder that looked expensive enough to pay Vivian's motel bill for a month. She set it on the table, her hands resting on either side as if framing something significant. Alistair spent the last 8 years of his life monitoring your family. He hired investigators not to interfere but to observe. He accumulated quite extensive documentation. Millicent opened the folder, revealing photographs. Vivian and Callum's wedding, the ceremony at the small chapel in Tacoma with 15 guests and flowers from the grocery store. The twins as newborns, a photo Vivian had posted to Facebook, printed and mounted in the folder with careful notation. Callum in uniform standing outside their apartment, a telephoto shot taken from across the street. He was watching us. The violation of it should have angered her, but Vivian felt only confusion. A sense of doors opening onto rooms she hadn't known existed. Why? Because he recognized in you something his family had lost. Millicent turned pages, revealing more documentation. Hospital records from when the twins were born. Callum's deployment schedules. Photographs of Vivian leaving for work, returning home, the mundane architecture of a life that apparently warranted surveillance. He kept notes, extensive ones. She pulled out a sheet of cream stationery, the handwriting the same slanted script from the torn letter Vivian had found in Callum's belongings. The text filled the page in dark blue ink, the penmanship of someone educated before computers made handwriting obsolete. She works 2 jobs and never complains. She maintained the household during 6 deployments without requesting assistance. She refused Cordelia's conditional offers of financial support, choosing independence over subordination. She reminds me of Elizabeth, direct, honest, capable of loving without calculation. She is what the Thornton family requires. She is what we lost. The words blurred as Vivian read them, her vision suddenly unreliable. This stranger, this grandfather who'd existed in secret, had watched her struggle and seen strength instead of failure, had noted her refusal to bow to Cordelia and called it virtue rather than pride. Mrs. Thornton, I need you to sit down. Millicent's tone shifted to something gentler, the voice of someone delivering news that changed trajectories. The estate of Alistair Thornton was valued at $287 million after taxes and distributions to various charitable foundations. He left detailed instructions for the dispersal of these assets. The number meant nothing, too large to comprehend, too distant from anything in Vivian's experience to register as real money rather than abstract mathematics. She remained standing, her hand finding the back of the chair for support. He established a trust. Millicent pulled out another document, this one thick with legal language and official seals. The beneficiary is listed as Vivian Eleanor Thornton, not Callum, not the Ashford family. You. The room tilted slightly, physics temporarily suspended. Vivian's grip on the chair tightened, her knuckles going white with the pressure required to keep herself upright. That's impossible. I never met him. Why would he? Because you are exactly what he wanted to protect. Millicent's interruption carried the weight of someone who'd spent weeks preparing this conversation, who'd rehearsed responses to every anticipated objection. The trust comes with conditions. You must manage the assets yourself for a minimum of 6 months. You cannot delegate authority. You must make all decisions regarding investments, disbursements, and strategic planning. Alistair believed capability was proven through action, not inheritance. She slid the document across the table. Vivian looked at it without touching it, as if contact might trigger some trap, might reveal this as an elaborate cruelty designed by Cordelia to provide hope before snatching it away. There's also a letter, personal, sealed until this moment. Millicent produced an envelope, cream-colored and heavy, the kind of stationery that cost more per sheet than Vivian currently had in her checking account. He asked that I deliver this to you directly in private when the time came to execute the trust. Vivian took the envelope with shaking hands, her fingers struggling with the seal. Inside 3 pages of that careful handwriting, words composed with the deliberation of someone who knew they were writing from beyond their own mortality. Vivian, we have never met, though I have watched you raise my great-grandchildren with a grace and determination that humbles me. I watched you work double shifts at the hospital while Callum was deployed. I watched you refuse Cordelia's conditional assistance, choosing hardship over her toxic generosity. I watched you hold my family together when its structure should have caused it to collapse. My son Callum's father died by his own hand 32 years ago. The official record says heart failure, a fiction Cordelia insisted upon, and money insured. But I knew the truth. I watched her systematically destroy him through criticism and control, through impossible standards and conditional love. I failed to protect him. I thought providing wealth would be enough. I learned too late that some poisons work slowly, accumulating dose by dose until the spirit can no longer sustain itself. I will not fail my great-grandchildren. I will not allow Cordelia's patterns to repeat across another generation. This inheritance comes with a burden and a request. The burden: you must learn to navigate wealth, to wield it as a tool, rather than let it corrode your integrity. The request: you must discover what truly happened to my son. I have left clues throughout the Thornton estate, the desk in the library, the garden behind the east wing, the hidden study that only Elizabeth knew about. Find them. Piece together the truth. Expose the rot that has consumed my family from within. Cordelia is poison dressed in pearls and philanthropy. She destroyed my son. She will attempt to destroy you and the twins if given opportunity. Do not grant it. You have the spine this family requires. You carry Elizabeth's spirit, though you never met her. She would have loved you as I have learned to from a distance, with the regret of someone who waited too long to act directly. The money is yours without restriction after the initial 6 months. Use it to protect my great-grandchildren. Use it to build the life Callum wanted for them. And if you choose, use it to bring justice to those who have evaded consequences for far too long. The desk, the garden, the study, all hold pieces of what was hidden. Find them. Complete what I could not. You are the guardian this family needs. You are the daughter I should have claimed. Alistair Thornton. Vivian read the letter 3 times, each pass revealing new layers. The confession of failure, the accusation against Cordelia, the implication that Callum's father's death was something more than tragedy, something closer to murder, accomplished through psychological warfare, and the promise of clues of evidence hidden away, of a mission that extended beyond mere survival into something darker and more dangerous. She looked up at Millicent, who'd been watching her read with the patience of someone who'd already absorbed the letter's contents, who understood its implications, and had spent weeks preparing for this conversation. "Is it true about Callum's father?" The question emerged hoarse, scraped raw by everything the morning had revealed. Did Cordelia really? "I wasn't Alistair's attorney when Charles Thornton died." Millicent's carefully neutral tone suggested she had opinions she wouldn't share. "But I was present when Alistair made his will. He was clear about his beliefs regarding his son's death, clear enough to embed those beliefs in legal documents that will withstand any challenge." Behind them, movement. Iris, sitting up in bed, rubbing sleep from her eyes, looking at her mother and the strange woman with the confused concern of a child sensing adult tension without understanding its source. "Mama, who's that?" Vivian folded the letter, returning it to its envelope, her mind already racing ahead to implications and consequences, and the yawning chasm between the life she'd been living and the one this inheritance represented. She looked at her daughter, at Jasper, now stirring beside his sister, at Millicent, with her briefcase full of documents that would transform everything. And she understood that Cordelia's door slamming shut yesterday had been the closing of one chapter, the end of begging and pleading and hoping for mercy from people who dealt only in transactions. This was something else. This was the opening of an account that had been building interest for 32 years, compounding through generations, waiting for someone capable of calling it due. "This is Ms. Cross, baby. She's a lawyer." Vivian kept her voice level, casual, as if attorneys appeared in motel rooms every morning with briefcases full of resurrection. "She's here to help us with some family business." Millicent produced a black card from her briefcase, American Express Centurion, the weight of it apparent even from across the table. She set it down beside the trust documents with the careful placement of someone handling something sacred. "The account is already active, no spending limit. The PIN is the last 4 digits of your social security number, which you'll want to change at your earliest convenience." Her tone remained professionally neutral, but something in her eyes suggested she understood exactly what this moment meant. "I took the liberty of booking a suite at the Nines Hotel for tonight. 2 bedrooms, full kitchen, 24-hour room service. I assumed you'd want to transition from current accommodations." Vivian picked up the card, its heft unfamiliar in her palm. Platinum or titanium or whatever metal they used to signify that money was no longer a constraint, but a tool available for deployment against any problem that could be solved through its application. The embossed letters spelled out her name, Vivian E. Thornton, the E for Eleanor, the middle name she shared with Alistair's late wife, another echo of patterns she hadn't known existed. "How fast can I access the funds?" The question emerged practical tactical, her mind already moving past shock toward application. Liquid assets, available immediately. The trust is structured to provide monthly distributions of $1 million for living expenses, with additional funds available upon request for reasonable expenditures. Vehicles, real estate, education costs all approved within 48 hours. Millicent pulled out a tablet displaying account information with the efficiency of someone who'd handled estate transfers before. But I should mention there's one asset that requires immediate attention: the Thornton estate itself. She pulled up an image. A Victorian mansion on 3 acres, Queen Anne neighborhood, views of the city and mountains beyond. The architecture spoke of old Portland wealth, gables and turrets and windows that caught light like jewels. The grounds showed neglect, ivy climbing where it shouldn't, gardens gone wild, but the bones of the place remained magnificent. Alistair lived there alone for the last 15 years with minimal staff. He left it to you as well, along with all contents. He mentioned specifically that you'd want to explore it. The desk, the garden, the study, they're all there waiting. Millicent's gaze sharpened. Vivian, before you begin whatever investigation Alistair has set in motion, I need to be clear about something. Cordelia Ashford is not merely unpleasant, she's dangerous. Her connections run deep. Political, financial, legal, she's cultivated power for 4 decades. If you start digging into her past, into what happened to Charles Thornton, she will respond. Let her. The words emerged harder than Vivian intended, edged with something that had been building since yesterday's rain, since the door slamming, since reading Alistair's letter, and understanding that Callum had been shaped by traumas he'd never discussed, wounds that predated their marriage, and probably contributed to his own silences. I've spent 4 months trying to survive. Maybe it's time I started living again. Millicent smiled, a brief crack in her professional facade. Alistair said you reminded him of Elizabeth. Reading your background, understanding what you've endured, I believe he was correct. My firm will handle all legal matters. Banking, taxes, estate administration, consider it managed. But the decisions, the strategy, the navigation of what comes next, that's yours alone for the next 6 months. After that, if you wish to delegate, the option exists. Until then, you're learning to wield wealth the way Alistair did, as a weapon. They spent the next 2 hours reviewing documents, signing papers, establishing accounts and protocols. Millicent explained the structure of the trust, the network of investments and holdings that generated the wealth, the various shell companies and foreign accounts that Alistair had used to shield assets from exactly the kind of predatory examination Cordelia specialized in. She outlined tax implications, legal protections, the mechanisms by which money could be moved and deployed without triggering flags that might alert interested parties to sudden changes in Vivian's circumstances. The twins ate cereal from the motel vending machine, watching cartoons on the television, with the volume low, occasionally glancing at their mother and the strange woman, with expressions that suggested they understood something significant was happening without comprehending its nature. By noon, the transition was complete. Vivian Eleanor Thornton, formerly broke and desperate, currently in possession of access to resources that rendered most problems solvable through sufficient application of capital. The knowledge sat strange in her mind, like wearing someone else's clothes, the fit not quite right, the style unfamiliar. Millicent gathered her materials, preparing to leave. At the door she paused, her hand on the frame, her expression shifting to something more personal than professional. Alistair was a good man who made terrible mistakes. He loved his son and failed to protect him. He loved his grandson and never had the courage to reach out directly. He loved you in his way from his distance and hoped that providing resources might accomplish what his presence never could. She adjusted her glasses, a gesture that seemed designed to buy time for emotional composition. He gave you a weapon. How you choose to use it, whether for defense or attack, for protection or retribution, that's yours to determine. But he trusted you would use it wisely. I hope to prove him correct in that assessment. After she left, Vivian sat at the table, the black card in one hand, Alistair's letter in the other, the weight of transformation pressing down like atmospheric pressure before a storm. She thought about Cordelia's face yesterday, the contempt and dismissal, the casual cruelty of someone who'd never faced consequences for her actions. She thought about Callum, the parts of him that had always seemed slightly broken, the nightmares he'd attributed to deployment but maybe carried deeper roots. She thought about Charles Thornton, a man she'd never met who'd died when Callum was a child, whose death had been wrapped in lies and money and buried under official fictions. And she thought about what Alistair had written. The desk, the garden, the study. Clues waiting to be assembled, truth waiting to be excavated from decades of careful concealment. Iris climbed onto her lap, curling against her mother's chest, with the easy trust of a child who believed adults could fix anything if they tried hard enough. The faith of it broke something in Vivian's chest, shattered the careful control she'd maintained since the rain, since the door, since the moment she'd understood that no help would come from the people who should have provided it. "We're going on an adventure," Vivian whispered into her daughter's hair, the same lie she'd told in the rain transformed into something approaching truth. A real one this time, with a big house and a garden and mysteries to solve. Will there be bad guys? Jasper's question, immediate and excited the perspective of a 6-year-old boy for whom adventure necessarily included antagonists. Vivian thought about Cordelia, about Senator Harlan Blake, the name Millicent had mentioned in passing connections that suggested Alistair's investigations had uncovered more than family dysfunction, about whoever had been driving the car that killed Callum, the drunk driver story that felt increasingly inadequate the more she considered the timing, the convenience, the way it had removed the one person who might have asked difficult questions about his grandfather's death and his father's suicide. Yes, baby. She pulled him close, one child on each side, the three of them forming a unit that had endured deployments and death and poverty and would now face wealth and its attendant complexities. There will definitely be bad guys, but we're going to be smarter than they are. The Nines Hotel occupied a historic building in downtown Portland, all Art Deco elegance and carefully preserved grandeur. The suite Millicent had booked spread across 1,200 square feet, hardwood floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows furniture that had never been purchased from a discount warehouse or inherited from someone else's curb. The twins ran through the rooms, their excited shouts echoing off ceilings twice as high as any space they'd ever occupied, their joy at having separate beds, and a television that worked, and a bathtub large enough to swim in, bringing tears to Vivian's eyes that she blinked away before they could witness them. She stood at the window looking out over the city, the river visible in the distance, the mountains beyond, and allowed herself to feel it. The rage, the grief, the determination that had been building since yesterday compressed and refined into something dense and purposeful. Cordelia thought the game was over, thought she'd won by slamming a door and dismissing the inconvenient remnants of her dead son's unfortunate marriage. She didn't know the board had flipped. She didn't know the pieces had been rearranged while she'd been congratulating herself on her cruelty. Vivian pulled out her phone, searching through contacts for a name she'd saved months ago but never called. Detective Sarah Rodriguez, Portland Police, the woman who'd investigated Callum's death and left her card with a quiet suggestion that if Vivian ever had questions, ever wanted to discuss the case, the door remained open. The call connected after 3 rings. Detective Rodriguez, and professional clip of the voice of someone who received too many calls and had learned to assess threats within the first sentence. This is Vivian Thornton. You investigated my husband's death. Callum Thornton, the hit and run on I-84 4 months ago. She kept her voice steady, each word deliberate. You said if I had questions I could call. A pause. The sound of Rodriguez moving somewhere quieter. A door closing, ambient noise fading. Mrs. Thornton? Yes, I remember. What can I do for you? You told me the driver was drunk, that he crossed the median, that it was random. Vivian watched the city below, people moving through their lives, unaware that somewhere above them a woman was beginning a different kind of investigation. Was it random? Another pause, longer this time. When Rodriguez spoke again, her tone had shifted from professional courtesy to something more cautious, more alert. Why are you asking? Has something happened? I've come into some information about my husband's family, about his grandfather and his father and the patterns that seem to run through the Thornton line. Vivian chose her words carefully, aware that she was beginning something that couldn't be easily stopped. That momentum, once started, would carry consequences she could only partially anticipate. I want to know if my husband's death was an accident or if someone made it look like one. Mrs. Thornton, Vivian, that's a serious accusation. The driver confessed. He's serving time right now for vehicular manslaughter. Did you look into who might have paid him? Whether his family suddenly came into money? Whether there were phone calls or meetings before the accident that didn't fit the pattern of a man with 3DU is finally killing someone? The questions emerged rapid fire, shaped by hours of thinking through possibilities, through implications, through the suggestion in Alistair's letter that Cordelia's poison worked systemically, corrupting everything it touched. Rodriguez's silence stretched long enough that Vivian wondered if she'd pushed too hard, revealed too much, exposed herself to someone who might report these questions to exactly the wrong people. Come to my office tomorrow, 2 p.m. Bring any documentation you've received, any evidence that supports what you're suggesting. Rodriguez's voice had dropped to something quieter, more intense. And Vivian, be very careful. If you're right, if your husband's death was anything other than what it appeared, then you've just painted a target on yourself by asking questions. I know. Vivian watched her reflection in the window, saw herself superimposed over the city, over the mountains, over the vast territory she was preparing to navigate. I'm counting on it. She ended the call and returned to the main room where the twins had discovered room service and were examining menus with the reverence usually reserved for religious texts. They looked at her with expectant faces, waiting for permission to order anything from the glossy pages for confirmation that this wasn't temporary, that the adventure was real. "Order whatever you want, babies." Vivian settled onto the sofa, pulling them close, breathing in the smell of their shampoo, their skin the life she'd created and would now protect with resources she'd never imagined possessing. This is just the beginning. The Thornton estate waited on Alameda Ridge like a sleeping giant, 3 acres of overgrown gardens and Victorian architecture that spoke of wealth from an era when craftsmanship mattered more than cost. Vivian stood at the iron gates in early January, 2 months after Millicent's revelation, watching Iris and Jasper press their faces against the bars, with the wonder reserved for discovering castles were real. The house itself rose in layers of gabled roofs and turrets, bay windows catching the weak winter sun, ivy climbing where it pleased without regard for the damage it caused to mortar and siding. The grounds showed years of neglect, rhododendrons gone wild, pathways cracked and sprouting weeds, a fountain in the circular drive long since dry and filled with dead leaves. Millicent handed over a set of keys, brass worn smooth with decades of use. The staff was dismissed after Alistair's death per his instructions. He wanted you to explore without witnesses. The utilities are maintained, security system active. Everything else is exactly as he left it. The door opened onto a foyer that smelled of old wood and dust and time suspended. Hardwood floors stretched in geometric patterns beneath furniture covered in white sheets, ghost shapes suggesting the lives once lived here. A staircase curved upward to the second-floor banister carved from walnut, each newel post topped with finials shaped like acorns. Light filtered through stained glass panels set into the front door, casting colored shadows across walls papered in patterns from another century. Iris and Jasper ran ahead, their voices echoing through empty rooms, their excitement at discovering new spaces, temporarily overwhelming the weight of history pressing down from vaulted ceilings. Vivian moved more slowly, her fingers trailing along surfaces touching the accumulated layers of absence that permeated everything. The library occupied the entire west wing, floor-to-ceiling shelves loaded with volumes in leather bindings, their spines labeled in gold leaf. A massive desk dominated the center of the room, secretary-style, built from mahogany so dark it appeared almost black. This was it. The desk Alistair had mentioned. The first clue in whatever treasure hunt he'd constructed from beyond death. She approached it carefully, aware that Iris and Jasper had followed her back, drawn by their mother's focus. The desk featured dozens of small drawers and compartments, each with tiny brass pulls, each potentially hiding something or nothing. Vivian began opening them systematically, finding old pens and ink bottles, stamps from postal systems that no longer existed, paper clips rusted into abstract sculptures. Iris climbed onto the desk chair, spinning it in circles. Her hand brushed against the carved panel at the desk's back, and something clicked. A section of wood that had appeared solid swung inward, revealing a space perhaps 12 inches deep and 18 wide, hidden behind the facade of decorative carving. Inside, 3 leather-bound journals, their covers worn soft, with handling their pages filled with handwriting in faded blue ink. Vivian lifted them out with the care reserved for handling something both precious and potentially explosive. The first page of the first volume bore a name and date, Elizabeth Thornton, January 1985. She carried the journals to the reading chair by the window, settling into leather that molded around her body as if remembering previous occupants. The twins explored the library's higher shelves, using the rolling ladder to reach books about dinosaurs and space exploration, their chattering fading into background noise as Vivian opened the first journal and began to read. Elizabeth's handwriting flowed across pages in careful script. The kind taught before cursive became optional in schools. The early entries detailed mundane aspects of life in Portland society. Charity events attended, garden clubs joined, the weather noted with the precision of someone for whom such details mattered. But by March, the tone shifted. Charles has become infatuated with a woman named Cordelia Ashford. She's 22, daughter of the Ashford banking family, educated at Wellesley with a degree in economics. She apparently has no intention of using beyond social climbing. I watched her at the Multnomah Athletic Club yesterday, the way she calculates every conversation, measuring each person's utility. Charles sees none of this. He sees only her face, which is admittedly striking, and her charm, which she deploys with surgical precision. The entries continued through spring and summer, documenting a courtship Elizabeth observed with growing alarm. Cordelia's interest in the Thornton wealth, her subtle manipulation of Charles's insecurities, the way she positioned herself as the solution to problems she'd carefully created. By October, the engagement. By December, the wedding. Elizabeth's commentary grew darker with each entry, observations transforming into warnings that went unheeded. She married him today. White Dress Street, Mary's Cathedral. 500 guests who came for the spectacle rather than the celebration. I watched her face during the vows. She looked at Charles the way one might look at a stock certificate or a deed of transfer, a transaction successfully completed. Alistair tells me I'm being unfair, that I'm projecting my own fears onto a young woman starting her married life. But I know what I saw. She doesn't love him. She loves what he represents. Vivienne turned pages, watching the marriage deteriorate in blue ink and mounting dread. Charles withdrawing from friends, from family, from the activities that had once brought him joy. Cordelia's criticism presented as concern. Her demands framed as reasonable expectations. The systematic isolation of a man from everything that might provide perspective or escape. 18 months into the marriage, a son, Callum. Elizabeth's joy at becoming a grandmother complicated by watching her daughter-in-law treat the infant as another acquisition, something to be displayed at appropriate moments and handed off to nannies when inconvenient. The second journal picked up in 1987. Charles's depression now openly acknowledged. Therapy sessions that Cordelia attended and dominated, reframing her husband's unhappiness as weakness requiring correction rather than support. Medications prescribed and resisted Cordelia, insisting he was fine. He just needed to try harder, to be stronger, to meet his responsibilities like a man. Alistair appeared in these entries as a frustrated shadow trying to intervene and being blocked at every turn. Cordelia's skill at presenting herself as the long-suffering wife, dealing with her husband's inexplicable melancholy, her talent for making any attempt to help Charles look like interference in their marriage. The third journal's entries grew sporadic. Elizabeth's handwriting less controlled, emotion bleeding through the careful facade of observation. February 1990. March. April. Then nothing until October, and a single paragraph that filled an entire page, the words pressed so hard into the paper they'd nearly torn through. He's gone. Charles took pills yesterday afternoon while Cordelia was at her book club. The housekeeper found him. The official cause will be heart failure. Because Cordelia has already called in favors already constructed, the narrative already ensured that suicide doesn't taint the Ashford name or complicate the inheritance. She's planning the funeral as I write this, selecting flowers and music with the same detachment she brought to their wedding. Alistair and I have failed. We provided money when we should have provided intervention. We respected boundaries when we should have crashed through them. We watched our son die by degrees and called it respecting his autonomy. Now he's truly gone, and his son, 3 years old, already showing signs of the sensitivity that destroyed his father, is in that woman's care. We can't save Callum. She has legal custody, financial leverage, social connections that would make any custody fight catastrophic. But we can watch. We can document. We can wait for an opportunity to protect what remains of our family. The entry ended there. No more pages followed. Elizabeth herself had died 6 months later, brain aneurysm sudden and complete, leaving Alistair alone with his grief and his grandson beyond reach, and 30 years to cultivate the patience required to execute a plan from beyond his own grave. Vivienne closed the journal, her hands shaking. Callum had been 3 years old when his father killed himself. Old enough to remember something, perhaps. Old enough to internalize the trauma even if he couldn't articulate it. He'd never spoken about. Charles had deflected questions about his childhood with practiced vagueness that Vivienne had attributed to the closed-off nature some military men developed as protective mechanism. Now she understood it differently. Callum had grown up in Cordelia's house under her control, shaped by the same patterns that had destroyed his father. The difference was deployment. The Navy had provided escape structure, a world where competence mattered more than conformity to impossible standards. Callum had survived by leaving, by building a life as far from his mother as possible. Iris appeared at her elbow, climbing into the chair, curling against Vivienne's side. "Mama, why are you crying?" She hadn't realized she was. Vivienne wiped her face, pulling her daughter close. "Because sometimes we learn sad things about people we loved, and sometimes that makes us cry even when they're already gone." The sound of a car in the driveway pulled her attention to the window. A gray van, unmarked windows tinted dark enough to violate visibility laws. It idled at the end of the drive for 30 seconds, engine running, occupants invisible behind that tinted glass. Then it pulled away, slow and deliberate, broadcasting intention rather than concealing it. Vivienne's phone buzzed. Millicent's name on the screen. "They're watching the house. I have a contact at PPB running the plates, but they'll come back to a rental company with fake credentials. Cordelia knows you've taken possession. She's making sure you know she's aware. Let her watch." Vivienne kept her voice steady, despite the acceleration of her pulse, the primitive recognition that being observed by predators required heightened alertness. "I'm not hiding. There's something else. My firm received a letter this morning. Cordelia's attorneys are filing for emergency custody of Iris and Jasper. They're claiming you're mentally unstable, that the sudden inheritance has triggered a psychotic break, that the children are in danger." The absurdity of it would have been laughable if the threat weren't real. Vivian had navigated family court before, had seen judges make decisions based on appearance rather than evidence, had watched wealth translate into credibility while poverty bred suspicion. What do we need to do? I've already scheduled psychiatric evaluations with 3 independent specialists. We'll document your mental health comprehensively, create a record that contradicts every claim they'll make. But Vivian, this is just the opening move. Cordelia's trying to rattle you to make you reactive rather than strategic. I understand. The journals sat in her lap, heavy with history and implication. I'm going to keep looking through the house. If she's escalating, it means I'm getting close to something she doesn't want found. The evaluation took place the following week at a clinic in southwest Portland, 3 sessions with Dr. Helena Morrison, a psychiatrist who specialized in trauma and grief assessment. She asked questions about Callum's death, about the financial transition, about how Vivian was processing the changes in her circumstances. She administered standardized tests designed to identify delusions, paranoia, breaks from reality. At the end of the 3rd session, Dr. Morrison removed her glasses, cleaning them with deliberate care before speaking. Mrs. Thornton, you're one of the sanest people I've evaluated in 20 years of practice. You're grieving appropriately. You're cautious, understandably. You're strategic in your approach to sudden wealth, which suggests both intelligence and grounded perspective. Anyone claiming you're unstable is either delusional themselves or deliberately lying. The report would say as much, documented across 8 single-spaced pages that Millicent would file with the court before Cordelia's attorneys could schedule a hearing. But the victory felt hollow, defensive, reactive, exactly as Millicent had warned. February brought rain that never quite stopped, the kind that turned Portland into a watercolor of grays and greens, everything bleeding together in perpetual damp. Vivian hired Rosalind Harper, a former teacher in her 60s, whose references checked impeccably, to stay with the twins during the hours she spent at the Thornton estate, excavating its secrets room by room. The garden that Alistair had mentioned proved harder to interpret. Acres of overgrowth paths that had once been carefully maintained, now cracked and sprouting volunteers' beds where roses and peonies fought for dominance against invasive blackberries. Vivian walked the grounds in the rain, looking for anything that might qualify as a clue, finding only neglect and the stubborn persistence of perennials that refused to die despite years of inattention. Behind the east wing, a greenhouse stood with most of its glass panes intact, the structure's Victorian ironwork oxidized to deep rust. Inside, the air hung thick with humidity from plants that had learned to survive on rain alone. Clay pots lined shelves, their labels faded to illegibility, their contents ranging from vibrant succulents to desiccated sticks that might have once been something valuable. At the far end, a potting bench. Beneath it, a metal box painted green to blend with the surroundings, locked with a combination mechanism rather than a key. Vivian pulled it out, brushing away soil and spiderwebs, examining the dial marked with numbers 0 through 9, Elizabeth's birth year. The combination clicked open on the first attempt, revealing contents wrapped in oilcloth. Inside, photographs. Dozens of them, 8 by 10 black and white images with the grain and contrast of professional surveillance work. Charles Thornton in various locations around Portland, always with the same man. Tall, military-bearing, dark hair going gray at the temples. The timestamps on the photographs' backs spanned from January to September 1989, the year before Charles died. The final photo in the stack showed Charles and the man sitting at a cafe table, both leaning forward in intense conversation, Charles's hands gripping a folder thick with documents. The timestamp, September 15, 1989, 3 weeks before his death. A note card tucked beneath the photos, Elizabeth's handwriting. Charles said he found something in Cordelia's accounts. Transfers to offshore companies. He hired this investigator, Marcus Webb, former FBI, to trace where the money went. Marcus told him it connected to weapons shipments, gray market dealings through a company called Obsidian Defense. Charles was going to confront her. Then he died. Marcus disappeared 2 weeks later. His office burned, his files destroyed. I have these because Charles sent them to me for safekeeping the day before he confronted Cordelia. I've been too afraid to do anything with them. But you're reading this because I'm gone, and Alistair has hopefully found someone brave enough to finish what we couldn't start. Vivian photographed every image with her phone, uploading them to an encrypted cloud storage that Millicent had established. Then she called Detective Rodriguez. They met at a coffee shop in Selwood. Rodriguez, in plain clothes, her badge and service weapon concealed beneath a leather jacket that had seen better decades. She examined Vivian's phone, swiping through the photographs, her expression unreadable, until she reached the image of Charles and Marcus Webb. I know this investigator. Webb. He disappeared in 1989. Case went cold. Office fire was ruled accidental, but the timing was suspicious enough that some of us remembered. Rodriguez looked up from the phone. You're telling me Charles Thornton hired him to investigate Cordelia Ashford, and then both men ended up dead within weeks? I'm saying it's a pattern worth examining." Vivian kept her voice low despite the ambient noise of espresso machines and competing conversations. "Especially considering my husband died 4 months ago in circumstances you yourself found questionable." Rodriguez pulled out her own phone, texting someone, her thumbs moving quickly across the screen. "I have a friend at the FBI, white-collar crime division. If Cordelia's been laundering money for an arms dealer for 30-plus years, that's federal jurisdiction. But Vivian, understand what you're starting here. These aren't just powerful people. If Obsidian Defense is what I think it is you're talking about, connections that run through military contracts, political campaigns, international weapons trades, they don't just threaten, they eliminate threats. They already eliminated Callum." The certainty of it settled in Vivian's chest like stones, heavy and immovable. "I want to know who gave the order. I want evidence that proves it wasn't an accident, and I want every person involved to face what they've done." "Then you need to be very careful. No more solo trips to the estate. No predictable patterns. Vary your routes, your schedules, your locations. These people have resources and patience and absolutely no compunction about casualties." Rodriguez finished her text, pocketing her phone. "I'll reach out to my contact, but this moves slowly. Federal investigations take months, sometimes years. Can you stay patient while we build a case?" Vivian thought about Elizabeth's journals, about 30 years of patience that had ended with Alistair's death, and a letter to a granddaughter-in-law he'd never met. About Callum growing up in Cordelia's house, shaped by her toxicity, escaping only through deployment and death. "I can be patient, but I won't be passive." The custody hearing never materialized. Millicent filed the psychiatric evaluations, along with financial records demonstrating Vivian's stable management of the trust, character references from everyone from Rosalind to the manager of the hotel where she'd stayed, statements from Iris and Jasper's teachers noting their improved behavior and performance since the transition from motel to stable housing. Cordelia's attorneys withdrew the petition without explanation, a retreat that felt more tactical than defeated. The gray van continued its surveillance, appearing at irregular intervals outside the Thornton estate, outside the house Vivian had purchased in Alameda, outside the children's school, until she filed a restraining order that forced them to maintain greater distance. March arrived with the first hints of spring cherry blossoms opening prematurely during a warm spell that would later prove false promise. Millicent arrived at Vivian's house unannounced, carrying a wooden box of mail that had accumulated at her office. These were sent to Alistair over the years, letters Callum wrote but never mailed according to the notations. He apparently gave them to his grandfather during their few meetings, asked him to keep them somewhere safe. Alistair left instructions that you should receive them after you found Elizabeth's journals. The box contained perhaps 30 letters spanning from Callum's teenage years through his early 20s, before he'd met Vivian. The handwriting evolved from careful teenage script to the economical printing of someone trained to write clearly in adverse conditions. She read them chronologically, watching her husband grow up on paper, watching him process his father's death and his mother's control, and his growing awareness that something was deeply wrong with his family. The final letter, dated 3 weeks before Callum's death, made her hands shake so badly she had to set it down twice before finishing. "Grandpa, I found proof. Mother has been using Thornton Industries shipping logistics to move weapons for a PMC called Obsidian Defense. Gray market stuff, not quite illegal but close enough that exposure would destroy her. The transfers go back decades before Dad died, maybe to when he was still alive. I think Dad found out. I think that's why he confronted her. And I think she had him killed, or at least arranged circumstances that made suicide look inevitable. I have copies of the financial record shipping manifests communications between Mother and someone at Obsidian who signs his messages KV. I want to expose her. I want justice for Dad. But doing this destroys the Thornton name. It ruins everything you and Grandmother built. It makes Callum's legacy about corruption and murder instead of achievement and service. What do I do? Vivian and the twins are depending on me. But I can't let Mother keep getting away with this. I can't watch her operate with impunity knowing what she's done. I'm going to confront her next week. If you're reading this and I'm gone, please protect my family. Don't let her touch them. And if you can finish what I'm starting." Callum. Vivian read it 3 times each pass, revealing new layers of tragedy. Callum had known. He'd investigated his mother, found proof, planned to confront her. And 3 weeks later, a drunk driver crossed the median on I-84 at exactly the right moment to eliminate someone who'd become inconvenient. She called Rodriguez immediately, reading the letter verbatim over the phone, hearing the detective's breath catch at the implications. "This is motive. This is foreknowledge. This connects your husband's death directly to his investigation of Cordelia." Papers rustling in the background, Rodriguez moving into action. "I'm bringing this to my FBI contact today. We'll need the original's proper chain of custody, but Vivian, you just gave us the link we needed. The pattern isn't coincidence anymore. It's method." That night, Vivian couldn't sleep. She sat in the study of her new house, Callum's letter in front of her, trying to reconcile the man she'd married with the investigator who'd risked everything to pursue truth. He'd never mentioned any of this, had kept his discoveries secret even from her, perhaps trying to protect her from knowledge that might put her at risk. The phone rang at 2:17 a.m., the sound jarring in the silent house. Unknown number, Portland area code. Vivian answered, despite every instinct suggesting she shouldn't. Heavy breathing. Then a voicemail, older, refined accent carrying the weight of authority and implied threat. Mrs. Thornton, your husband made poor choices investigating matters that didn't concern him. I'd hate to see history repeat itself. Children need their mother. I'd advise you to remember that. The line went dead before she could respond. Vivian sat motionless, her heart hammering, every nerve suddenly alive to the vulnerability of windows without curtains, doors with locks that could be picked, the exposure of living in a house where people knew her location. She called Millicent, then Rodriguez, then a private security firm that Rodriguez recommended. By dawn, the house had cameras monitoring every entrance, motion sensors on the grounds, a direct link to a security company that would respond to any alarm within 4 minutes. But the message had been delivered. She was being watched. Her investigation had been noted. The people Cordelia worked with had resources and reach, and absolutely no hesitation about targeting families. Rodriguez arrived before noon with 2 federal agents, both wearing the kind of suits that suggested government employment and the kind of expressions that suggested they'd seen worse than whatever Portland could offer. They interviewed Vivian for 3 hours, recording every detail about the letters, the journals, the photographs, the surveillance, the threatening phone call. They asked about Callum's behavior before his death, whether he'd seemed paranoid or frightened, whether he'd changed any patterns or taken any precautions. Vivian told them everything, watching them take notes in identical black notebooks, their questions clinical and thorough. When they finished, the older agent, Special Agent Thomas Mackenzie, 20 years with the Bureau, leaned back in his chair. Mrs. Thornton, what you've provided gives us enough to open an official investigation into the Ashford family's financial dealings and their potential connection to Obsidian Defense. But I need to be clear about something. These investigations take time. Months, possibly years. We need to build ironclad cases, because people with Cordelia Ashford's resources have lawyers who can find holes in anything less than perfect. I understand. I'm not sure you do. Mackenzie's tone sharpened with concern rather than condescension. Your husband was killed, we believe, because he threatened to expose these operations. His father died under similar circumstances. You're now doing exactly what got both of them murdered. The people running Obsidian don't care about legal niceties. They care about protecting their revenue streams. You are currently threatening a multi-million-dollar operation that has survived for decades by eliminating threats efficiently. Then what should I do? Stop asking questions. Pretend my husband died in a random accident. Let his father's murder go unanswered for another 30 years. The frustration that had been building since November finally found voice. I have children who deserve to know their father died for something that his investigation mattered, that truth eventually wins. What kind of lesson am I teaching them if I back down because powerful people threaten me? Mackenzie exchanged glances with his partner, some silent communication passing between them. Then he pulled a card from his pocket, writing a number on the back. This is my direct line. Anytime, any threat, any concern, you call. We're going to assign surveillance to your house, discreet but present. We're going to monitor Cordelia's communications and finances. And we're going to build a case that puts everyone involved in prison for the rest of their lives. But you need to step back. Let us handle the investigation from here. Vivian took the card, knowing even as she accepted it that she wouldn't fully comply. Stepping back meant surrender. It meant letting other people control the timeline, the direction, the ultimate resolution. She'd spent 4 months powerless, dependent on systems that didn't care about her specific grief. Now she had resources and information and a mission that Callum had died trying to complete. She wouldn't step back, but she'd be smarter about moving forward. The call came 3 weeks later, late March, rain returning after the brief false spring. Vivian's phone showed a number she'd saved but never expected to use. Whitmore Ashford, Callum's father, the man who'd stood silent while Cordelia abused their son, who'd chosen peace over protection. His voice shook so badly she could barely understand the words. Vivian, please, I need help. There are men here. They said Cordelia sent them to clean up loose ends. They have guns. Please, I don't want to die like Charles. Background noise, voices speaking in Russian or Ukrainian, hard consonants and threatening cadence, a door slamming, Whitmore's breathing harsh and panicked. Where are you? The house. Willamette Heights. Cordelia's at a fundraiser. They came through the back. They knew the security codes. They knew exactly. The line cut to silence. Vivian's first instinct was to drive there immediately, to crash through whatever barrier separated Whitmore from safety. Then training kicked in, the ER nurse's ability to triage, to recognize which emergencies required direct intervention and which required calling for backup. She dialed 911, reporting an active home invasion at the Ashford estate, armed intruders, shots possibly fired. Then she called Mackenzie, whose team was apparently already monitoring Cordelia's communications and had picked up chatter about accelerating their timeline. "Stay where you are. Do not approach the house. We have tactical teams en route. This is exactly the kind of escalation I warned you about. They're eliminating anyone who might testify." Vivian paced her study, listening to police scanner traffic through an app Rodriguez had recommended. Multiple units responding to Willamette Heights. FBI on scene. Tactical team establishing perimeter. Then silence that stretched 10 minutes before Mackenzie called back. "We got him. Whitmore's alive, shaken but unharmed. 2 men in custody, both with ties to Obsidian defense contractors. They were there to kill him, make it look like a home invasion gone wrong. He's agreed to cooperate, fully testify about everything Cordelia's forced him to participate in over the years." Relief flooded through Vivian's chest, followed immediately by the tactical assessment that this changed everything. Whitmore's testimony could corroborate Callum's letters, could provide insider details about Cordelia's operations, could transform circumstantial evidence into prosecutable fact. What happens now? Now we bring Cordelia in for questioning. We execute search warrants on her properties, her offices, her financial institutions. We move fast before she can destroy evidence or flee jurisdiction. Mackenzie paused. "Vivian, you did good work. The journals, the letters, the photographs, they gave us the foundation. Whitmore's testimony gives us the structure. We can build this case now. We can get justice for your husband and his father." She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that the system would function, that wealth and connections and decades of careful corruption could be overcome by evidence and determination. But she'd watched Cordelia operate, had seen how easily she manipulated narratives, how thoroughly she'd buried Charles's suicide under acceptable fictions. This wasn't over. This was barely beginning. That night, Vivian sat with Iris and Jasper, reading them stories about dragons slain and kingdoms saved, their faces relaxed in the security of bedtime routines and mother's presence. After they slept, she returned to Callum's final letter, reading it again in the quiet house with its new security system and federal surveillance and all the protections money and government attention could provide. "Finish what I'm starting." She understood now what he'd meant. Not just expose Cordelia, not just bring Obsidian to justice, but break the pattern that had killed his father and would have eventually killed him regardless of what happened on A84. The pattern of silence and complicity, of choosing comfort over truth, of letting powerful people operate without accountability, because confronting them required courage most people didn't possess. Vivian had that courage, had discovered it in motel rooms and hospital shifts, had refined it through deployments, and single parenthood had crystallized it through grief into something hard and purposeful. She would finish what Callum started, would ensure his death meant something, would make certain that Iris and Jasper grew up knowing their father had been a hero who died fighting for truth rather than a victim who died in random tragedy. The rain intensified outside March in Portland, showing its true nature after the false promise of early blooms. Vivian stood at the window, watching water stream down glass, distorting the city lights below into abstract impressions. Somewhere out there, Cordelia was learning that her carefully constructed world was beginning to collapse. That evidence was being gathered, testimony compelled, charges being prepared. Good. Let her feel what Charles felt, what Callum felt. Let her understand that power built on corruption eventually crumbles under its own weight. Vivian's reflection stared back at her from the dark window. A woman transformed by necessity, from widow to investigator, from victim to agent of consequence. She touched the glass, feeling the cold through her fingertips, and made a promise to the man who'd loved her enough to try protecting her from this fight. She would finish it, no matter how long it took, no matter what it cost. She would finish what he started, and she would make sure justice finally found its way to people who thought themselves beyond its reach. April brought the machinery of federal investigation into full operation, transforming Vivian's discoveries into evidence chains and witness testimony. Special Agent Mackenzie established a command center in a nondescript office building in Beaverton walls, covered in photographs and timelines connecting Cordelia to Obsidian Defense, through 30 years of carefully laundered transactions. Vivian spent hours reviewing documents with prosecutors, explaining how she'd found Elizabeth's journals, what led her to the greenhouse photographs, the sequence of events that connected Charles's death to Marcus Webb's disappearance to Callum's supposed accident. The drunk driver who'd killed Callum sat in a federal holding facility, now his public defender replaced by a lawyer Mackenzie's team provided in exchange for cooperation. His confession arrived in typed pages that Vivian read with hands that refused to stay steady. A man named Viktor Petrov had approached him 6 months before the crash, offered $50,000 for a specific job on a specific date. Wait on I-84 eastbound. Watch for a black Ford truck license plate provided. Cross the median at precisely the moment that would ensure maximum impact. The money had come in cryptocurrency untraceable until FBI forensic accountants tracked it backwards through exchanges and wallets to an account in the Cayman Islands registered to a shell company Cordelia controlled. Premeditated murder disguised as drunk driving. Callum had been executed for threatening to expose his mother, and the man who'd done it had been paid enough to accept a manslaughter charge as the cost of doing business. Vivian walked out of Mackenzie's office into spring sunshine that felt inappropriate, too bright and cheerful for the weight of confirmed suspicions. Millicent waited in the car, drove her home in silence that respected the enormity of knowing rather than just suspecting. At the house, Iris and Jasper were building a fort in the living room with Rosalind's help, their laughter filtering through the quiet that had descended over Vivian like a shroud. She stood in the doorway watching them. These children who would grow up knowing their father had been murdered, that their grandmother had ordered it, that family could be the source of greatest harm rather than safety. The knowledge would scar them. But silence would have scarred them differently, taught them that injustice went unanswered, that powerful people operated beyond accountability, that truth mattered less than comfort. Rosalind noticed her first rose from the pillow fort's interior with the grace of someone whose knees still remembered how to bend. "Children, your mother needs a moment. Why don't you show me that drawing you've been working on?" After they'd left, Vivian sank onto the sofa, her phone already ringing with Mackenzie's number. She answered, knowing before he spoke that the news would be significant. "We executed search warrants this morning. Cordelia's home office, her charitable foundation's headquarters, 3 safe deposit boxes in different banks. We found financial records going back 28 years. Wire transfers to Obsidian Defense totaling just over $40 million. Shipping manifests showing weapons components moved through Thornton Industries' logistics network. And communications emails, letters, recorded phone calls between Cordelia and a man named Konstantin Volkov." The name meant nothing to Vivian, but Mackenzie's tone suggested it should. "Volkov runs Obsidian's Eastern European operations. Former KGB, current arms dealer wanted by Interpol for trafficking, and about a dozen other charges we can't prove. He's been using Cordelia's legitimate business infrastructure to move illegal weapons for nearly 3 decades. She gets a percentage. He gets access to shipping routes and customs clearances that would be impossible through normal channels. Can you arrest him?" "We have people tracking his location. But Vivian, there's something else. We found dash cam footage from the truck that hit Callum. The driver kept it probably as insurance in case his employers tried to eliminate him instead of paying. It shows everything. Petrov waiting at the designated spot, the moment he sees Callum's truck, the deliberate acceleration and lane change, the impact. We have video proof of murder." The room tilted slightly. Vivian closed her eyes, seeing Callum in the seconds before impact, probably thinking about grocery shopping or picking up the twins or what he'd cook for dinner. Not knowing he'd been marked for death, that someone was watching and waiting, that his mother's reach extended this far. "When do you arrest Cordelia?" "We're building the case for maximum charges. Murder, conspiracy, racketeering, money laundering, arms trafficking. We want everything to stick, which means being thorough. But there's a strategic element to consider." Mackenzie's tone shifted to something more calculated. "Senator Harlan Blake has been Cordelia's political protector for years. Campaign contributions, favorable legislation, blocked investigations. If we move on her, he'll activate every connection he has to shut us down, unless we move on both of them simultaneously." Vivian understood the implication. Wait longer, build a bigger case, take down the entire network rather than just one node. But waiting meant Cordelia remained free, meant she could destroy more evidence, could threaten more witnesses, could potentially flee to jurisdictions without extradition treaties. "How long?" 6 weeks, maybe 8. We're tracking Blake's communications now, documenting his involvement. Once we have enough to charge him as co-conspirator, we arrest both of them at the same time. Maximum impact, minimum opportunity for either one to call in favors. 6 weeks. Vivian calculated the timeline against her own plans, against the memorial event she'd been organizing for June, the charity gala that would launch the Callum Thornton Memorial Fund and provide scholarships for children of deployed service members. She'd invited 300 people, including most of Portland's social elite. Including Cordelia, though she'd expected that invitation to be declined. What if I could guarantee Cordelia would be in a specific location at a specific time? Somewhere public where arresting her would send a message about accountability, regardless of wealth or connections. Mackenzie went quiet, understanding clicking into place. "You're planning something." "I'm planning to honor my husband's memory with a charitable foundation that will help military families. If the timing happens to coincide with federal law enforcement's operational needs, that seems like efficient resource allocation." Vivian, if this goes wrong. It won't. Trust me to finish what I started. She ended the call and opened her laptop, pulling up the guest list for the memorial gala. Cordelia Ashford invitation sent RSVP pending. Vivian composed a personal note, each word chosen with surgical precision. Cordelia. I know we've had our differences, but Callum would have wanted his family present at this event. Whatever our personal conflicts, he loved you. I'm asking you to set aside past tensions for one evening and help me celebrate the man who was your son and my husband. Genevieve is attending. Whitmore will be there. Please consider joining us. The children would like to see their grandmother. Vivian. The lies tasted bitter as she typed them, but manipulation required meeting people where they lived. Cordelia's ego wouldn't let her skip an event where Portland society would gather, where her absence would be noted and interpreted as weakness. And the mention of Iris and Jasper would sting, a reminder that her grandchildren existed beyond her control, thriving despite her attempt to deny them shelter. The RSVP arrived 3 days later. Cordelia would attend, bringing Genevieve as her guest. Vivian forwarded the confirmation to Mackenzie with a simple message. June 15th, 7 p.m. Governor Hotel Ballroom. Your window. May passed in the compressed time of intensive preparation. Vivian worked with event planners to create something elegant but not ostentatious, meaningful rather than showy. The ballroom would feature photographs of Callum throughout his life, from childhood through his Navy career to family moments with the twins. Tables would carry centerpieces made from native Oregon flowers rather than expensive imports. The menu would be simple, good food served well, nothing designed to impress through excess. She met with Rodriguez weekly, reviewing security plans that would allow FBI tactical teams to position themselves without alerting Cordelia or her security detail. The hotel's management cooperated fully once Mackenzie explained the situation, providing floor plans and access codes, ensuring that when the moment came, every exit would be covered. Genevieve called in the middle of planning, her voice carrying uncertainty that Vivian had never heard before. I need to talk to you, in person, alone. They met at a coffee shop in Northwest Portland, neutral territory where neither woman held advantage. Genevieve arrived early, already seated when Vivian walked in. Her usual armor of designer clothing replaced by simple jeans and a sweater that looked like it might have come from an actual retail store rather than a personal stylist. Thank you for meeting me. I wasn't sure you would. Vivian sat across from her, ordering coffee from a waitress who appeared and disappeared with practiced efficiency. What do you want, Genevieve? To apologize for everything. For the way I treated you at the door that night, for laughing when you asked for help, for being exactly the kind of person my mother raised me to be: cruel, calculating, concerned only with appearances and status. The words came rehearsed but sincere, as if she'd practiced this speech multiple times alone. I've been in therapy since the FBI questioned me, working through patterns I didn't even recognize as toxic because they were normal in our house. What changed? They showed me the dashcam footage, the moment that truck hit Callum's. I watched it happen, Vivian. I watched my brother die because our mother paid someone to kill him, and I realized I'd been complicit in that same system my entire life. Not directly, not consciously, but through choosing comfort over confrontation, through pretending not to see what was obvious. Tears tracked down Genevieve's face, her composure cracking to reveal something raw underneath. Vivian waited, offering neither comfort nor condemnation, letting the silence stretch until Genevieve continued. The FBI wants me to testify. About Mother's business dealings, about conversations I overheard, about transactions I helped facilitate without understanding what they actually were. I'm going to do it. But I wanted you to know first. Wanted you to understand that I'm not doing this for immunity or a deal. I'm doing it because Callum deserved better. Because my father deserved better. Because those children deserve to know their family isn't all poison. The coffee arrived, steam rising from cups neither woman touched. Vivian studied Genevieve, searching for signs of manipulation or performance, finding only exhaustion and the kind of grief that came from realizing you'd been complicit in your own family's destruction. Testifying against Cordelia will destroy your relationship with her, permanently. You understand that? I understand I never had a real relationship with her. I had a performance contract where love was conditional on perfect compliance with her expectations. That's not family. That's employment with terrible benefits. Genevieve wrapped her hands around her cup without drinking. Will you let me see the twins sometime? I know I have no right to ask, but they're my niece and nephew, and I'd like to try being an actual aunt, instead of the person who laughed at them in the rain. Vivian considered the request, weighing it against her instinct to protect her children from anyone connected to Cordelia's toxicity. But Genevieve was trying, however imperfectly, to break patterns that had shaped 3 generations. Denying that effort meant perpetuating the same cycle of rejection and conditional love that had destroyed Charles and damaged Callum. Start small. A supervised visit. We'll see how it goes. She finally sipped her coffee, the warmth spreading through her chest. But Genevieve, if you hurt them, if you bring any of your mother's patterns into their lives, I will make sure you never see them again. Do you understand? I understand. And thank you for giving me a chance I probably don't deserve. After Genevieve left, Vivian remained at the table processing the conversation's implications. Another witness against Cordelia. Another piece of evidence that her control was fragmenting, that the people she'd relied on to maintain her carefully constructed facade were choosing truth over complicity. The momentum was building. June 15th would bring everything together. The memorial, the arrests, the public exposure of corruption that had operated in shadows for 3 decades. Vivian felt the weight of it, the responsibility of being the catalyst for collapse, the awareness that whatever happened next would reshape Portland's social landscape and several people's lives. She'd started this wanting justice for Callum. Somewhere along the way, it had become about more than one man's death. It had become about breaking the cycle that killed Charles, that damaged Callum, that would have eventually reached Iris and Jasper if left unchecked. Evil that was allowed to operate without consequence metastasized, spreading through families and communities until confronting it required more courage than most people possessed. Vivian had that courage, had discovered it in motel rooms and hospital shifts, had refined it through deployments, and widow's grief had crystallized it into purpose through Alistair's posthumous mission. She would see this through, not just for Callum but for every person Cordelia had damaged through her casual cruelty and systematic corruption. June 15th arrived with the kind of perfect weather that seemed designed for significant events. Clear skies, temperature in the mid-70s. Mount Hood visible from downtown Portland like a blessing. Vivian dressed carefully, choosing a navy dress that Callum had always liked, simple jewelry that suggested elegance without excess. Iris and Jasper wore matching outfits they'd helped select, excited about the party that would honor their father, too young to understand the other layers operating beneath the celebration. The Governor Hotel's ballroom had been transformed according to Vivian's specifications. Photographs of Callum lined the walls chronologically, creating a visual biography from childhood through his final deployment. Tables were set with white linens and native wildflowers, programs at each place setting describing the Memorial Fund's mission and scholarship criteria. A string quartet played chamber music at volume low enough to permit conversation background elegance that honored the occasion's solemnity while allowing for social interaction. Guests began arriving at 7, Portland's elite in evening wear, appropriate for charity galas, their conversations initially awkward as people navigated the tension between celebration and memorial. Vivian worked the room with practiced efficiency, thanking donors, introducing military families who'd benefit from the scholarship fund, ensuring everyone felt welcomed and purposeful. Cordelia arrived at 7:40, Genevieve beside her, both women dressed in designer gowns that probably cost more than most attendees earned monthly. She moved through this crowd with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her welcome anywhere, accepting condolences about Callum with practiced grace that suggested she'd forgotten she'd refused to help his family when they needed it most. Vivian watched from across the room, her heart rate steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Mackenzie had confirmed FBI teams were in position waiting for her signal. Rodriguez sat at table 12, dressed for the occasion but carrying her service weapon concealed beneath her jacket. Whitmore occupied table 8, his nervousness visible in the way he gripped his water glass, knowing what was coming, his testimony already secured in depositions that would surface during Cordelia's trial. The dinner portion proceeded without incident. Speeches from military families who'd benefited from similar programs, from Callum's former commanding officer, who spoke about his dedication and courage, from Vivian herself, who talked about her husband's commitment to service and justice, his belief that systems should protect the vulnerable rather than empower the corrupt. Cordelia applauded politely at appropriate moments, her expression suggesting she found the entire evening tedious but necessary for maintaining appearances. She didn't see Mackenzie entering through the ballroom's north entrance accompanied by 6 agents in tactical gear. She didn't notice Rodriguez standing hand moving to her weapon. She didn't understand the shift in room temperature as 300 guests suddenly recognized that something beyond memorial fundraising was occurring. Mackenzie approached Cordelia's table with the deliberate pace of someone who'd executed hundreds of arrests and felt no need to rush this one. The string quartet's final note faded into silence. Every conversation stopped. The only sound was Mackenzie's footsteps on the hardwood floor, each step echoing like a judge's gavel. "Cordelia Ashford," his voice carried across the ballroom with professional authority. "Stand up, please." Cordelia looked at him with the irritation of someone unaccustomed to commands from people she considered subordinates. "Excuse me, who are you to interrupt?" "Special Agent Thomas Mackenzie, Federal Bureau of Investigation. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, money laundering, and arms trafficking. Stand up, now." The color drained from Cordelia's face, her carefully maintained composure fracturing as the implications registered. Around the room, guests pulled out phones recording the moment, the footage that would lead news broadcasts and trend on social media, the public accountability that wealth and connections had previously prevented. "This is absurd. I want my lawyer. You can't arrest me at a charity gala. This is harassment. I'll have your badge." The threats emerged automatically, reflexive responses from someone who'd spent decades believing her power made her untouchable. Mackenzie produced handcuffs, motioning for her to stand. When she didn't move, 2 agents stepped forward, lifting her from her chair with professional efficiency. The handcuffs clicked closed around her wrists, the sound sharp and final in the silent ballroom. Cordelia's eyes found Vivian across the room, recognition dawning with the force of revelation. You did this. You set me up." Vivian stepped forward, her voice steady and clear enough for everyone to hear. "I honored my husband's memory by finishing the investigation you killed him for starting. That's not a setup. That's justice finally reaching someone who thought herself beyond its reach." "You're nothing." Cordelia's composure shattered completely, her voice rising to something approaching hysteria. "You're a nurse who trapped my son with pregnancy. You'll never be family. You'll never be. I'm the mother of your grandchildren." Vivian's interruption cut through Cordelia's tirade with surgical precision. "That's more than you'll ever be. I'm the person who protected them when you tried to destroy them. I'm the woman your son loved enough to choose over your toxic control. And I'm the guardian Alistair trusted to finish what you've spent 30 years trying to bury." The agents began moving Cordelia toward the exit, her protests continuing but losing coherence as shock and rage overwhelmed her ability to articulate. At the ballroom door, she turned back one final time, her gaze sweeping across the assembled guests who'd witnessed her arrest, the society she'd manipulated for decades now recording her downfall. "You'll all regret this. Every one of you. I have connections. I have resources. I'll destroy." "Senator Harlan Blake has also been arrested." Mackenzie's calm statement cut through her threats. "Along with 4 executives from Obsidian Defense Corporation. Your connections are currently more concerned with their own legal problems than yours. Your resources have been frozen pending asset forfeiture proceedings, and the only thing you're going to destroy is whatever remains of your credibility during a trial where multiple witnesses will testify to 3 decades of criminal activity." The doors closed behind her, muffling her voice as agents escorted her to waiting vehicles. The ballroom remained silent for perhaps 10 seconds before conversation exploded, everyone talking at once, phones still recording the social media posts already spreading across platforms. Genevieve sat at the table. Cordelia had vacated her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. Vivian approached, uncertain whether to offer comfort or maintain distance. Before she could decide, Genevieve looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you. For being strong enough to do what I couldn't. For protecting those children even when it meant confronting someone the rest of us were too afraid to challenge." She stood, moving toward the exit with the unsteady gait of someone whose foundation had just cracked beneath them. "I'm going to testify. Everything I know, everything I witnessed, everything I helped her do, without understanding what it was. Callum deserved better. My father deserved better. You deserve better." She left before Vivian could respond, disappearing into the crowd of guests who parted to let her pass. Whitmore approached from his table, looking older than his 64 years, the stress of recent weeks visible in new lines around his eyes. "Vivian, I know nothing I say can make up for the years I stood silent, the times I should have protected Callum and chose peace instead. But I want you to know," his voice cracked, emotion overwhelming control, "I'm going to testify about everything. Charles's death, the business dealings I helped facilitate, the pattern of abuse Cordelia normalized until I couldn't recognize it as wrong. Whatever consequences come from that, I accept them. The FBI said you were cooperative. Cooperative doesn't undo 30 years of cowardice, but maybe it prevents 30 more." He glanced toward where Iris and Jasper sat with Rosalind shielded from the arrest's immediate drama. "May I see them? Just for a moment I've lost the right to be called grandfather, but I'd like them to know I existed, that not everyone in their father's family was poison." Vivian considered the request, weighing it against protective instincts that demanded isolation from anyone connected to Cordelia's toxicity. But Whitmore had called for help when threatened, had chosen testimony over silence, had broken patterns that required courage to confront. "Brief visit, supervised, we'll see how it goes." The same parameters she'd offered Genevieve, conditional acceptance that acknowledged potential without granting automatic trust. "But Whitmore, if you hurt them in any way, if you bring any of her patterns into their lives, you'll never see them again." He nodded, understanding, moving toward the children with hesitant steps, a man approaching grandchildren who didn't know him, carrying the weight of failures that couldn't be erased but might possibly be redeemed through different choices moving forward. The gala continued for another hour, transformed from memorial fundraiser into witness to justice. Donations exceeded projections by 300%. Wealthy Portlanders, apparently eager to demonstrate their support for causes championed by women who arrested corrupt socialites at charity events. By 10 p.m., when the last guests departed, the Callum Thornton Memorial Fund had secured enough funding to provide full scholarships for 20 military children annually. Vivian stood in the empty ballroom surrounded by photographs of the man she'd loved, processing everything that had happened in the space of 3 hours. The plan had worked. Cordelia was in federal custody. The witnesses were committed to testimony. The pattern that had destroyed 2 generations had been interrupted by someone willing to confront it despite the risks. She pulled out her phone, calling Mackenzie. He answered immediately, his voice carrying satisfaction. "Clean operation. By the book. Cordelia's being processed now. We've already executed additional warrants on her properties, seized financial records, frozen accounts. Senator Blake is cooperating. Apparently his lawyer advised him that loyalty to co-conspirators isn't worth a life sentence." "When's the trial?" "Probably 8 months. Federal cases take time." "But Vivian, with the evidence." "We have the witnesses willing to testify, the dash cam footage showing premeditated murder. There's no question about conviction. Cordelia's facing minimum 25 years, likely more. She'll die in prison." The finality of it should have brought satisfaction. Instead, Vivian felt only exhaustion, the adrenaline draining away to leave behind awareness of how much energy this fight had required, how much of herself she'd invested in pursuit of justice for a man who couldn't witness his own vindication. "Thank you. For believing me. For building the case. For making sure powerful people faced consequences. Thank you for providing the foundation. The journals, the letters, the courage to keep pushing when most people would have accepted the official story. Callum would be proud of you." She ended the call and sank into one of the ballroom chairs, finally alone with the weight of accomplishment and the hollowness that often accompanied it. Justice achieved didn't resurrect the dead. It didn't undo the damage corruption had caused across generations. It simply ensured that patterns stopped, that future victims wouldn't face the same machinery of casual cruelty and systematic abuse. Rosalind appeared with Iris and Jasper, both children tired but happy, their excitement about the party unmarred by understanding of the arrest they'd witnessed. Vivian gathered them close, breathing in the scent of their shampoo, their skin, the life she'd protected through months of investigation and risk. "Can we come to more parties like this?" Iris's question emerged sleepy, her head already drooping against Vivian's shoulder. "I liked seeing all the pictures of Daddy. Yes, baby. We'll have lots of opportunities to remember him, to celebrate who he was and what he fought for." 18 months passed in the compressed time of legal proceedings and new routines. Cordelia's trial dominated Portland news for weeks, testimony revealing the scope of her corruption and the casualties it had claimed. Whitmore testified about Charles's final months, about recognizing his son's depression and choosing compliance over intervention because confronting Cordelia seemed impossible. Genevieve described growing up in a house where love was performance and approval was currency earned through perfect adherence to impossible standards. The dashcam footage played in court, jurors watching Callum's final moments, seeing the deliberate acceleration and lane change that transformed accident into execution. Victor Petrov testified about the $50,000, about Cordelia's instructions delivered through intermediaries, about understanding that he was being hired to kill someone but not caring enough about the target's identity to refuse the money. The verdict came after 4 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Cordelia to 30 years in federal prison, citing the calculated nature of her crimes, the death toll they'd produced, the pattern of corruption spanning 3 decades. Senator Blake received 15 years. 4 Obsidian defense executives got sentences ranging from 8 to 20 years, their organization dismantled and assets seized. Vivian attended sentencing with Iris and Jasper, now 8 years old and old enough to understand that their grandmother had done terrible things, that justice sometimes looked like sending family members to prison. They didn't cry, didn't protest, simply absorbed the information with the resilience children developed when their stability came from a parent who protected them rather than one who used them. October arrived with the kind of perfect autumn weather Portland occasionally produced: crisp mornings and warm afternoons, leaves turning colors against blue skies. The Elizabeth and Callum Thornton Center for Veterans and Families opened on a 3-acre campus in southeast Portland, buildings designed to provide transitional housing, job training, legal assistance, and mental health services for military families navigating the chaos of deployment and return. Vivian stood at the podium during the ribbon-cutting ceremony, surrounded by dignitaries and donors and families who'd already begun benefiting from the center's programs. Iris and Jasper sat in the front row, fidgeting in dress clothes they'd outgrown since last wearing them. Genevieve occupied a seat in the third row. her attendance still tentative but increasingly regular over the past year of supervised visits that had gradually evolved into something approaching actual relationship. My husband believed that service meant protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, that justice required confronting corruption regardless of who perpetrated it. That family should be a source of strength rather than a weapon used to control and diminish. Vivian's voice carried across the assembled crowd, amplified by speakers, but drawing strength from something deeper than technology. This center exists because Callum was willing to risk everything to expose truth, because his grandfather trusted a stranger to finish what family had started, because sometimes the best way to honor the dead is to protect the living. She cut the ribbon to applause cameras recording the moment, the beginning of something that would outlast everyone present. The buildings behind her would house families transitioning from deployment trauma. The classrooms would train veterans in skills that translated to civilian employment. The legal clinic would fight for benefits and protections that government bureaucracy too often denied. After the ceremony, Vivian walked the grounds with Iris and Jasper, showing them the memorial garden that occupied the center of campus. A stone bench faced a fountain, water circulating through carefully designed channels that created sound without overwhelming peace. A bronze plaque mounted on the bench's back read, "Callum Thornton, Hero, Father, Truth Seeker. His courage exposed corruption. His legacy protects families. His love endures." Iris traced the letters with small fingers, sounding out words she was learning to read. "Does Daddy know we found the truth? Mama, does he know what you did?" Vivian pulled both children close, her arm around each of them, her heart simultaneously full and broken in the way that defined parenthood after loss. "I think he's been guiding us all along, sweetheart. Every clue we found, every person who helped us, every moment when we could have given up but didn't. I think that was him, making sure justice finally found its way home." Jasper looked up, his face serious in the way 8-year-old boys sometimes achieved when processing concepts too large for their experience. "Grandpa Whitmore said we made Daddy proud, that we're braver than him because we didn't stay quiet." The visits with Whitmore had continued, carefully supervised at first, gradually relaxing as he demonstrated consistent behavior and genuine effort to build relationship without repeating Cordelia's patterns. He'd sold the Willamette Heights mansion, distributed most of his assets to the Thornton Center, lived simply in a small apartment where he volunteered at a veterans crisis line, trying to prevent the kind of isolation and despair that had killed his son. "Grandpa Whitmore is right. Your father would be very proud of both of you, of the way you've been kind to people who hurt us, of the way you're learning that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, just means choosing not to let other people's poison destroy your own heart." They sat together on the bench, the October sun warm on their faces, the sound of water providing background peace. Vivian thought about Cordelia in federal prison, about how the woman who'd destroyed so many lives through her casual cruelty would spend her remaining years in circumstances she'd spent her entire life avoiding. The satisfaction of that justice felt distant, less important than this moment with her children. This center that would help families. This memorial that would ensure Callum's courage outlasted his death. Her phone buzzed. Millicent's name on the screen. She considered ignoring it, preserving this peace for a few more minutes, but legal matters rarely waited for convenience. "I'm at the ceremony. What do you need?" "I have something that just arrived." Alistair left one final letter held by his estate attorney with instructions that it be delivered on the day the center opened. "I'm bringing it to you now." Millicent appeared 10 minutes later, walking across the memorial garden with an envelope in her hands. The same cream-colored stationery Alistair had used for his first letter, the same careful handwriting marking it for specific delivery. Vivian opened it alone while the children explored the garden's fountain, splashing their hands in the water, despite knowing it would earn gentle scolding later. The letter contained 2 pages, Alistair's final words composed in the months before his death, written to a woman he'd never met but trusted completely. "Vivian, if you're reading this, the center exists. Cordelia has faced justice. The pattern has been broken. You've accomplished what I could not, what Elizabeth could not, what 3 generations failed to achieve. You protected my family when everyone else failed them. I've spent years regretting my inaction. I provided Charles with money when he needed intervention. I watched Cordelia destroy him and called it respecting his autonomy. I maintained distance from Callum when he needed grandparents willing to challenge his mother's control. I accumulated wealth instead of using it to protect the people who mattered. You've taught me, even in death, even through the observations I made without your knowledge, that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the willingness to act despite terror. You lost your husband, faced poverty, endured threats from powerful people, and still chose truth over comfort. That's heroism. That's the quality I wish I'd possessed when it would have saved my son." The Thornton name carries weight in Portland. Historically, that weight came from wealth and social position. You've transformed it into something better. Now when people hear Thornton, they'll think of the center that helps families. They'll remember that corruption was exposed, justice achieved, patterns broken. You did that. Not money, not connections, you. I know we never met, but watching you raise your children alone, work impossible hours, refuse Cordelia's conditional offers of assistance. I learned to love you as the daughter I should have had. Elizabeth would have loved you too. She'd recognize her own spirit in your refusal to accept injustice simply because confronting it was difficult. Thank you for being strong enough to finish what I started too late. Thank you for protecting Iris and Jasper. Thank you for ensuring Callum's death meant something, that his investigation produced change rather than becoming another buried secret. You are the guardian this family needed. You are the daughter I never claimed. You are exactly what the Thornton legacy required, someone who understood that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in courage to do right regardless of cost. Live fully, love completely. Teach your children that sometimes the best way to honor the past is to build a better future. Alistair Thornton. P.S. The estate attorney has one final item. A photograph Elizabeth took on Callum's 3rd birthday, weeks before Charles died. I couldn't look at it for years, too painful, too full of everything we failed to protect. But you should have it, so your children know their father was loved, that moments of joy existed even in families complicated by tragedy. They deserve to know the whole story, pain and love both. Vivian folded the letter with trembling hands, pressing it against her chest as if proximity to her heart might somehow transmit gratitude backwards through time to a man who'd died believing he'd failed his family. He hadn't failed. His patience had created the conditions for justice. His trust had empowered someone capable of executing the plan he'd designed. His love, expressed through surveillance and posthumous gifts rather than presents, had protected the people who needed protecting. Millicent handed over a framed photograph, its edges worn from handling the image faded to sepia tones. A 3-year-old boy with Callum's eyes and smile standing between 2 adults who must have been Charles and Cordelia before corruption had completely consumed her, before depression had claimed him. They looked happy, or at least they looked like people who might still become happy, who hadn't yet arrived at the tragedies that would define and destroy them. Vivian studied the image, seeing Callum in his father's face, recognizing the genetic architecture that had been passed to Iris and Jasper. This was their history. Complicated, painful, marked by failures and casualties and patterns that had required 3 generations to break. But also marked by love, by Elizabeth's observations, and Alistair's plans, by Callum's courage and her own determination to finish what others had started. Iris and Jasper ran back from the fountain, their hands dripping water, their faces flushed with the joy of discovering something delightful. They didn't yet understand everything their grandmother had done, the full scope of corruption their father had died exposing. But they would learn. Vivian would tell them the whole story, pain and love, both failure and triumph, the complexity of family that could be both source of greatest harm and greatest healing. "Mama, can we come back tomorrow? I want to show my class the fountain." Jasper's request emerged, breathless excitement overriding formality. "And tell them about the center that helps families like ours." "Yes, baby, we can come back as often as you want. This is your father's legacy. It belongs to all of us." She stood gathering her children close, the letter in one hand and the photograph in the other, the weight of finished business finally lifting from her shoulders. Cordelia would spend her remaining years in prison. The center would help hundreds of families navigate transitions that had destroyed hers. Iris and Jasper would grow up knowing their father had been a hero. Their mother had been strong enough to finish his mission. Their family's wealth came with responsibility to protect people rather than exploit them. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the memorial garden, painting the fountains water gold and orange and red. Somewhere in a federal prison, Cordelia was learning that power built on corruption eventually collapsed. Somewhere in Portland's social circles, people were discussing the scandal and its lessons about accountability. Somewhere in heaven or memory or the spaces grief created, Callum and Charles and Elizabeth and Alistair were watching, finally at peace, because someone had been brave enough to break the patterns that destroyed them. Vivian looked at the bronze plaque one final time, reading her husband's name in letters that would outlast everyone present, carrying his legacy forward into years none of them would see. She'd started this journey broken, grieving, standing in rain outside Cordelia's mansion, hearing doors slam on the only family her children had left. She was ending it with resources that would help thousands, with justice achieved against people who thought themselves untouchable, with children who understood that courage meant confronting wrong regardless of cost. Not a bad transformation for a widow who'd lived in a motel and now controlled enough wealth to reshape her community's support for the vulnerable. The pattern was broken. The poison had been purged. The family could finally heal.